She falls asleep on a mafia boss's shoulder on a train, but wakes up in a mansion instead of her home. The scent of stale coffee and fryer grease had settled into the fibers of Emily's uniform, clinging to her skin like a second, unwanted layer. It was 2 a.m, and the city was weeping, a steady, cold drizzle coating the cracked pavement in a sheen of black oil and neon reflections. Emily pushed open the heavy glass door of the diner, stepping out into the biting wind. Her ankles throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. It had been a double shift, followed by an hour of scrubbing the grill because the night porter had called in sick again. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, clutching her coat tighter against her chest, inside her pocket, her tips from the last 10 hours crumpled against her knuckles. $42. It was enough for groceries for the week, provided she stuck to rice and beans, but it would not make a dent in the rent due on the 1st. The subway station was 3 blocks away. Emily walked with her head down, her gaze fixed on the scuffed toes of her sneakers. The city at this hour was a different creature than the one that bustled during the day. It was hollowed out, echoing with distant sirens and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. She moved purely on muscle memory, descending the concrete stairs into the subterranean chill of the station. The platform was deserted, save for a pile of discarded newspapers near the trash can. The fluorescent lights hummed with an angry, insectoid buzz, flickering intermittently. When the train finally rumbled into the station, screeching against the tracks, it looked like a metal beast emerging from a dark cave. The doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Emily stepped inside and collapsed into the nearest seat. The car was warm, stiflingly so, smelling faintly of ozone and damp wool. She leaned her head back against the scratched plastic window, closing her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, the train was moving, rocking her gently. She blinked, trying to clear the fog of exhaustion from her mind, and realized she was not entirely alone. Across the aisle, a few seats down, sat a man. He was out of place. That was the first thing her tired brain registered. People on the last train of the night usually look like her, worn down, dressed in work clothes, staring blankly at nothing. This man was dressed in a suit that cost more than Emily made in a year. It was charcoal gray, tailored perfectly to broad shoulders, with a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He sat with a stillness that was almost unnatural, his hands resting loosely on his knees. Emily shifted, trying to make herself smaller. She watched him from beneath her lashes. He was handsome, devastatingly so, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair swept back from his forehead. But there was a hardness to him, a sharp edge that warned against approach. As he turned his head slightly to look out the black window, the harsh subway light caught the side of his neck. A scar, thick and jagged, ran from just behind his ear down into the collar of his shirt. It was an old wound, silvery against his olive skin, but it spoke of violence. He turned his gaze toward her. Emily froze. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. He did not smile. He did not look away. He simply watched her, not with predatory hunger, but with a quiet, intense curiosity that made the hair on her arms stand up. It was the way a wolf might look at a deer, not necessarily about to strike, but acknowledging that they occupied different places in the food chain. She broke eye contact first, heart hammering against her ribs. She shifted in her seat, turning her body away from him, pressing her shoulder against the cold window. The train clattered over a rough section of track, the rhythmic clack, 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 clack acting like a lullaby she did not want to hear. Her eyelids felt heavy, weighted down by iron. She told herself she would just close them for a minute, just to rest her burning eyes. The train swayed, the warmth of the car wrapped around her. The exhaustion that had been gnawing at her bones finally won the war against her vigilance. She drifted. At some point, the train took a sharp turn. Gravity, indifferent to social boundaries, pulled her sideways, in her sleep. Emily slid. She did not wake when her body tilted. She did not wake when her head came to rest not against the cold glass, but against something solid, warm, and smelling of expensive sandalwood and rain. Vincent Moretti stiffened. He had been watching the girl for the last 5 stops. She looked like a ghost of the city, pale, fragile, with dark circles bruised under her eyes. He knew who she was, in a vague sense. He had seen her walking this route before, always with that heavy bag, always with that look of bone-deep weariness. He was not a man who usually noticed civilians, but there was something about her exhaustion that felt honest in a city full of lies. When her head landed on his shoulder, his first instinct was violence. His body was a weapon, honed by years of war with the Romano family. An unauthorized touch usually resulted in broken fingers. His hand twitched, ready to shove her away, to wake her with a cold command. But he stopped. She sighed in her sleep, a soft, ragged sound, and shifted closer, seeking his warmth. A loose strand of her hair tickled his jaw. Vincent looked down at her, up close. She looked even younger. Her eyelashes fanned against her cheek. She trusted him, unknowingly, foolishly. She had lowered her guard completely in the presence of a man who had ordered 2 hits earlier that evening. He should wake her. He should shove her off and move to the next car. Instead, Vincent remained perfectly still. He relaxed the tension in his shoulder so it would be a more comfortable pillow. He breathed in the scent of her, diner grease and vanilla shampoo, and found it strangely grounding. For the first time in 12 hours, the constant, buzzing hypervigilance in his head went quiet. The train rattled on. Stations blurred by. The few other passengers exited, casting curious glances at the well-dressed man and the sleeping waitress. Assuming they were a couple returning from a long night, Vincent met their eyes with a flat, dead stare that made them look away instantly. "Next stop, terminal," the automated voice crackled overhead. "Last stop." The train began to slow. The brakes squealed. Emily did not stir. She was in a coma of exhaustion. Vincent looked at the reflection in the darkened window. He saw a monster in a suit, and resting against him, a girl who deserved better. If he woke her now, she would stumble out into the cold, walk alone in the dark to whatever small, empty apartment she called home. She would wake up tomorrow and do it all over again. The train hissed to a halt. The doors opened. The cold air rushed in. "End of the line!" the conductor called out from 3 cars down, his voice echoing. Vincent made a decision. It was impulsive, reckless, and entirely against the code he lived by. He did not care. He shifted, sliding his arm gently around her waist. She murmured something unintelligible and curled into him, with a fluidity born of immense physical strength. Vincent stood up, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. She was alarmingly light. He walked off the train, her head tucked into the crook of his neck. He moved through the empty station, his footsteps silent on the concrete. Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. A black sedan was idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the gloom. The driver, a massive man named Marco, stepped out immediately, opening the rear door. Marco's eyes widened slightly when he saw the girl in his boss's arms, but he knew better than to ask questions. "Home, boss?" Marco asked, his voice gravelly. "The estate," Vincent said quietly, "and turn up the heat." He settled into the back seat, keeping Emily cradled against him as the car pulled away, leaving the city behind. Vincent looked down at the stranger in his arms. He ran a thumb lightly over the back of her hand, careful not to wake her. He had stolen something. He knew that. But as the city lights faded into the darkness of the countryside, he could not bring himself to regret it. The light was wrong. That was the first thing Emily noticed. The light in her apartment was gray and filtered through a dirty window pane that faced a brick wall. This light was gold. It was rich and warm, filtering through heavy velvet curtains. The second thing was the smell. The smell of mildew and old carpet was gone, replaced by fresh linen and lavender. The third thing was the bed. It was soft, impossibly soft. It felt like sleeping on a cloud. Emily opened her eyes. She was staring up at a ceiling painted with a mural of clouds and cherubs. A crystal chandelier, delicate and terrifyingly expensive, hung from the center. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She sat up, gasping. The movement made her head spin. She was not in her uniform. She was wearing a silk shirt that was far too big for her. The sleeves rolled up past her wrists. Her hands flew to her chest, checking the buttons. They were fastened. "Where?" Her voice cracked. She scrambled out of the bed, her bare feet sinking into a plush Persian rug. The room was enormous. Antique furniture made of dark mahogany, a fireplace large enough to stand in, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto trees, endless, green trees. This was not the city. "Hello," she called out, backing toward the wall. The heavy double doors opened. Emily flinched, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the bedside table and holding it up like a club. Vincent Moretti walked in. He was wearing a different suit today, navy blue, but the air of command was the same. He held a silver tray with a porcelain teapot and a single cup. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes flicking to the candlestick in her hand. "You have good instincts," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, like whiskey poured over gravel. "But you won't need that." "Who are you?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling. "Where am I? Did you kidnap me?" Vincent set the tray down on a small round table near the window. He moved with a deliberate slowness, showing her his hands were empty. "My name is Vincent," he said, "and you are at my home, just outside the city limits." "That doesn't answer the question," Emily snapped, gripping the candlestick tighter. "How did I get here? The last thing I remember is the train." Vincent turned to face her. He clasped his hands behind his back. "You fainted on the train. You were unconscious. The conductor was going to call an ambulance, but the police in that district are unreliable. I brought you here to recover." It was a lie, or at least mostly a lie. He delivered it with such calm authority that Emily almost believed him. Almost. "I didn't faint," she argued, though doubt crept in. She'd been so exhausted. "Has she passed out?" "I fell asleep. And even if I did faint, why didn't you take me to a hospital?" "I have a private doctor on staff," Vincent said smoothly. "He checked you over. You are suffering from extreme exhaustion and malnutrition. You needed rest. Not a waiting room." He took a step closer. Emily took a step back, hitting the wall. "I want to go home," she said. "You can," Vincent replied, "when you are well enough." "I am well enough now." Vincent studied her. He looked at her trembling hands, her pale face, the way she favored her left leg where her ankle was sore. "You are shaking," he noted. "Sit down, Emily. Drink the tea." She stiffened. "How do you know my name?" He gestured vaguely to the chair where her canvas bag sat. "I checked your ID. I needed to know who I was helping." Helping. The word felt heavy in the air. "I didn't ask for your help," Emily said, though she lowered the candlestick slightly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her dizzy again. "I know," Vincent said. His expression softened. Just a fraction. It transformed his face, making him look less like a statue and more like a man. "But you needed it. Please, sit. I'm not going to hurt you." There was something in his tone, a gravity that felt like truth. Emily looked at the door, then back at him. She was miles from anywhere. Clearly, running now, barefoot and weak, would be futile. She sat on the edge of the bed, keeping the candlestick within reach. "Why am I wearing this?" she asked, gesturing to the shirt. "Your clothes were unpleasant," Vincent said diplomatically. "My housekeeper changed you. She burned the uniform. I will replace it." "You burned my uniform?" Emily stared at him. "I have a shift tomorrow. I need that job." Vincent's jaw tightened. "You do not need that job. It is killing you." "Some of us don't live in castles," she shot back, anger flaring over the fear. "We have bills. We can discuss your employment later," Vincent said, dismissing the topic with a wave of his hand. "For now, eat." He nodded toward the tray, then turned and walked toward the door. "Wait," Emily called out. He paused, his hand on the brass handle. He looked back over his shoulder. "Why?" she asked. "Why would a man like you help someone like me?" Vincent looked at her for a long moment. The silence stretched, thick and electric. He looked at the way the morning light caught her hair, the same way it had on the train. "Because," he said softly, You looked like you needed a place to rest." He stepped out and closed the door. The lock did not click. Emily sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door. She poured the tea. Her hands were shaking. She took a sip. It was Earl Grey. Perfect and hot. She went to the window and looked out. The grounds were breathtaking. Manicured lawns, hedges shaped into geometric patterns, a stone fountain in the distance. It was paradise. But then she saw them. 2 men were walking near the edge of the rose garden. They were dressed in dark suits, similar to Vincent's. One of them had a rifle slung over his shoulder. He stopped, scanned the tree line, and said something into a radio clipped to his lapel. Emily stepped back from the window, her breath hitching. This wasn't just a mansion. It was a fortress. She was safe, Vincent had said. But looking at the armed men patrolling the perimeter, Emily realized there was a fine line between being protected and being a prisoner. She drank the tea, the caffeine clearing her head. She needed to leave. She needed to get back to her small, dirty, manageable life. But as she looked around the room, at the books stacked on the mantel, the fresh flowers on the table, and the sheer quiet of the place, a traitorous thought whispered in her mind. She had slept. For the first time in years, she had really truly slept. She put the cup down and walked to the door. She turned the handle. It opened. She walked out into the hallway. It was wide, lined with portraits of severe-looking men who shared Vincent's dark eyes. The house was silent, but it felt alive, like a sleeping beast. Emily began to walk, her bare feet silent on the polished wood floor. She would find a phone. She would call a cab, or the police, or someone. But as she turned the corner and saw the grand staircase spiraling down into the foyer, she saw Vincent standing at the bottom. He was speaking to the man she had seen in the garden. Vincent's back was to her, but his voice carried up the stairs. "Increase the patrol on the north gate," Vincent was saying. The gentle tone he had used with her was gone, replaced by cold steel. "If anyone from the city gets within a mile of this property, you put them in the ground. Do you understand?" "Yes, boss," the man said. Emily shrank back against the wall, her heart pounding in her throat. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a patient. She was something else entirely. And she had no idea if she should be running toward the front door or hiding under the bed. Vincent turned, his gaze lifting to the top of the stairs as if he sensed her presence. Emily pulled back just in time, heart racing. She was trapped, and the terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she wanted the gate to open. The mansion was a paradox of silence and noise to the untrained ear. It was quiet, the stillness of thick carpets, heavy drapes, and rooms that had not seen laughter in decades, but Emily had spent 3 days listening, and she had learned the house's language. It was the rhythmic thud of heavy boots on the gravel outside, the digitized beep of keypads on the east wing doors, and the static hiss of radios being adjusted in the hallway. She walked through the library, trailing her hand along the spines of leather-bound books that looked as if they had never been opened. The room was magnificent, smelling of old paper and lemon polish, but the windows were locked, not just latched, but secured with heavy iron bolts that required a key she did not possess. Through the glass, she watched a gardener pruning the hydrangeas. He was a large man with a thick neck and hands that looked too clumsy for delicate flowers. When he stretched to reach a high branch, his jacket rode up, revealing the distinct matte black shape of a pistol holstered at his hip. Emily stepped back from the window, her breath catching in her throat. This was not a sanctuary. It was a holding cell wrapped in velvet. She made her way to the dining room for breakfast. The table was long enough to seat 20 people, a vast expanse of dark mahogany that gleamed under the morning light. Vincent sat at the head, reading a newspaper, a cup of black coffee steaming near his hand. He was dressed in a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing the strong, corded muscles of his forearms. He looked up as she entered. His expression was neutral, but his eyes, dark, intelligent, and always watchful, tracked her movement across the room. "Good morning," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Is it?" Emily asked, pulling out the heavy chair to his right. She did not wait for him to help her. She sat down, folding her hands on the table to hide their trembling. "I tried the front door this morning. Vincent, it was locked." Vincent folded the newspaper and set it aside. "The security system is automated. It keeps the world out. It keeps me in," she countered. Her voice was sharper than she intended, fueled by 3 days of confusion and a growing, gnawing fear. "I appreciate the clothes. I appreciate the food, but I have a life. I have a shift at the diner. My landlord is probably wondering where I am. You can't just keep me here like a stray cat you found in the rain." Vincent picked up his coffee cup, his gaze never leaving hers. "I handled your landlord. Your rent is paid for the next 6 months, and the diner. I called the owner. You are on extended medical leave." Emily stared at him, her mouth falling open slightly. You what? You had no right." "I bought you time," he said simply. "You were collapsing. Emily. You were walking through life like a corpse waiting to lie down. I gave you a reprieve." "Why?" She slammed her hand on the table. The silver cutlery rattled. "Why do you care? Who are you? Really?" "Because men who run legitimate businesses don't have guards with guns pruning their rose bushes." The air in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop. Vincent slowly lowered his cup. He looked at her, and for a second the mask slipped. Emily saw something raw and terrifyingly lonely behind his eyes. "I am a man who has many enemies," he said quietly, "and because of that, I am a man who rarely gets what he wants." "And what do you want?" Emily challenged, leaning forward. "Why am I here?" Vincent looked at her, really looked at her, as if memorizing the line of her jaw, the spark of fire in her eyes. He looked like a man starving who had just been offered a feast he knew he shouldn't touch. "Because," he murmured, his voice rough, "I didn't want to let you go yet." The honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. It wasn't a threat. It was a confession. Emily sat back, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a confusion that was far more dangerous. He wasn't keeping her for ransom. He wasn't keeping her to hurt her. He was keeping her because he was lonely? The thought was absurd. He was Vincent Moretti. He owned this palace. He commanded armies of men. And yet, looking at him now, sitting alone at the head of this ridiculous table, he looked like the most isolated person she had ever seen. The days settled into a strange, suspended rhythm. Vincent did not lock her in her room. He gave her the run of the house and the inner gardens. He gave her access to a music room with a grand piano that was perfectly tuned and a library filled with first editions. He treated her with a terrifying gentleness, like she was made of spun glass that might shatter if he spoke too loudly. But he watched her. From his office window on the second floor, Vincent stood in the shadows, watching Emily walk through the maze of hedges. She stopped to smell a lavender bush, her face tilting up to the sun. His hand clenched on the window frame. He knew the rules. He had written them himself in blood and scars over the last 20 years. Rule 1. Civilians are liabilities. Rule 2. Never bring the war home. His father, the old Don, had been a butcher. He had taught Vincent that love was a weakness, a soft underbelly that enemies would gut you through. Vincent had watched his father destroy everything he touched, including Vincent's own mother, driving her away with his violence. Vincent had vowed to be different. He had built walls of ice and steel around his life. He kept his business in the dark and his home empty. Until that night, on the train, he had seen her sleeping, her head lolling, completely defenseless. And in that moment, the steel walls had groaned. He remembered the feeling of her weight against his shoulder, a trust she hadn't given, but he had taken. He knew he should send her back. Every hour she stayed here put a target on her back. The Romano family was circling, looking for a weakness, but when he looked at her walking in his garden, breathing his air, the silence in his head finally stopped screaming. He was a selfish man. He knew that. He was risking her life for his own peace of mind. "Boss," a voice came from the doorway. It was Marco. "We have movement in the south sector. Romano's scouts. Vincent turned away from the window, his face hardening into the mask of the dawn. Double the perimeter. If they cross the line, burn them. He glanced back one last time at the girl in the garden. Just one more day, he told himself. I will let her go tomorrow. The storm hit 3 nights later. It came tearing across the countryside with a fury that shook the foundation of the mansion. Thunder cracked like artillery fire, closer and louder than anything Emily had heard in the city. She was in her room, reading. When the lights flickered and died, the darkness was absolute. Emily froze. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. She'd always hated the dark, a remnant of a childhood spent in foster homes where darkness meant you were alone and unprotected. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She fumbled for the door, stepping out into the hallway. "Hello?" she whispered. "Is anyone there?" A beam of light cut through the blackness at the far end of the hall. It bobbed closer, illuminating a white dress shirt and a grim face. "Vincent? It's just a power line down." His voice came from the darkness. Steady and calm. "The generator will kick in for the security systems, but the main house lighting takes a moment. Are you all right?" He lowered the flashlight so it wasn't blinding her. In the spill of light, his face was shadowed, his features sharp and severe. I don't like the dark," she admitted, her voice small. Vincent paused. He seemed to weigh something in his mind. "Come with me." He led her not back to her room, but down the grand staircase, the flashlight beam dancing over the portraits of his ancestors. They went to the kitchen, a massive industrial space that felt surprisingly intimate in the storm. Vincent lit candles, thick pillars of beeswax that smelled of honey. He placed them on the center island, their golden glow pushing back the shadows. He poured 2 glasses of red wine and slid one across the marble counter to her. "Sit," he said, hopping up onto a stool opposite her. For the first time, he looked approachable. The suit jacket was gone. His tie was undone. The flickering candlelight softened the harsh lines of his face. "Tell me about the city," he said. "Tell me about the life I stole you from." Emily took a sip of the wine. It was rich and dry. "It's not much of a life," she said, staring into the flame of the candle. "Just work, sleep, work again. My mom died 3 years ago. Since then, it's just been me, trying to keep my head above water." "What was she like?" Vincent asked. "She was kind." Emily smiled sadly. "Too kind for the world. She used to say that as long as someone remembers you, you never really leave. But sometimes—" She hesitated, tracing the rim of her glass. "Sometimes I feel like I'm fading. Like if I disappeared tomorrow, the only thing that would notice is the rent check bouncing." Vincent watched her, his eyes dark pools reflecting the candle flame. "You wouldn't fade," he said intensely. "You are vivid. Emily, you burn brighter than you think." "And you?" Emily asked, emboldened by the wine and the intimacy of the storm. "Do you have a family? People who remember you?" Vincent looked away, staring at the rain lashing against the dark window. "I have soldiers. I have employees. I have enemies. That's not an answer." He was silent for a long time. The thunder rumbled overhead, a low growl. "I had someone," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Years ago, before I became this. Her name was Isabella." Emily held her breath. "What happened to her?" "She was collateral damage," Vincent said. The pain in his voice was a physical thing, a jagged shard of glass. "I was young, arrogant. I thought I could keep one foot in the light and one in the dark. My enemies used her to get to me. They didn't kill her, but—" He closed his eyes. "She left. She had to survive me. She had to leave me. I haven't spoken her name in 10 years. He looked at his hands, large, capable hands that were scarred from a lifetime of violence. "I learned my lesson," he said. "I don't touch things that are pure. I don't bring the dark to the light." "Then why am I here?" Emily whispered. Vincent looked up. His gaze collided with hers, and the air between them crackled. It was thicker than the storm outside. "Because I am weak," he confessed. "Because looking at you is the only thing that has made sense in a decade." Emily reached out across the counter. It was an instinct, a pull she couldn't resist. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand, tracing the thick, white scar that ran across his knuckles. Vincent froze. He stared at her hand touching his, as if he expected her skin to burn him. He didn't pull away. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. "Not anymore," he said hoarsely. She moved her hand up, her fingertips grazing the inside of his wrist. His pulse was hammering there, wild and fast, betraying his calm facade. "You aren't a monster, Vincent," she said softly. "Monsters don't regret." Vincent turned his hand over, catching her fingers in his. His grip was firm, hot and desperate. He pulled her slightly closer, the marble counter the only thing separating their bodies. "You don't know what I am," he warned, his eyes searching hers. "If you knew, you would run into the storm." "I'm not running," Emily said. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was the wine, or the storm, or the way he looked at her like she was the only source of light in a dying world. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a tentative kiss, a question. Vincent went rigid. For a heartbeat, he did nothing. Then, a low sound broke from his throat, half groan, half growl. He kissed her back. It wasn't gentle. It was starving. His hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, deepening the kiss with a slow, consuming intensity that made her knees buckle. He tasted wine and danger. Emily gasped against his mouth, her hands clutching the front of his shirt. She felt himself being lifted. Vincent's hands were on her waist, effortless and strong, and then she was sitting on the edge of the kitchen counter, her legs dangling, eye level with him. He stepped between her knees, pressing closer. The heat of his body soaked through her thin silk shirt. His hands roamed over her back, possessing, memorizing. The kiss grew urgent, a frantic exchange of breath and need. Emily felt a fire ignite in her belly, a sudden, sharp desire that she had never felt before. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down, wanting to erase the distance between them. For a moment, the mansion, the guards, the guns, it all vanished. There was only the storm outside and the man in front of her, unraveling. Then, Vincent broke the kiss. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were blown wide, black with desire but also clouded with sudden, sharp realization. He looked at her swollen lips, her flushed cheeks, the way she was clinging to him, and he looked terrified. He stumbled over the word. He stepped back, his hands leaving her waist as if he had been burned. "I cannot do this." Emily sat there on the counter, breathless and dazed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The loss of his warmth was immediate and cold. "Vincent," she whispered. He ran a hand through his hair, turning his back to her. His shoulders were tense, rigid with control. "Go to your room, Emily," he said, his voice rough and commanding again. "Please, before I make a mistake, we cannot fix—" He didn't turn around. Emily slid off the counter, her legs shaking. She looked at his broad back, at the tension radiating off him. She touched her lips, which still tingled from the pressure of his mouth. She didn't know what had just happened. She didn't know if she was a prisoner falling for her captor, or a woman finding a kindred spirit in the dark. But as she walked out of the kitchen, leaving him alone with the dying candles, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't afraid of him anymore, and that terrified her more than the guns ever could. The morning sun that filtered through the heavy velvet drapes was pale and watery, offering no real warmth to the sprawling estate. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Emily moved through the corridors like a ghost haunting a palace she did not own. Every time she turned a corner, she braced herself to see him. The broad shoulders, the sharp jawline, the dark eyes that had looked at her with such terrifying hunger in the kitchen the night before. She avoided the common rooms. She took her coffee in the library, sitting tucked away in a high-backed leather chair, staring unseeingly at a first edition of a Dickens novel. Her skin still tingled where his hands had rested on her waist. The ghost of his mouth was still pressed against hers. It was maddening. She should be terrified. She should be planning a way to climb the gate or signal a passing car. Instead, she was sitting here, replaying the way his breath had hitched when she touched his scar. Around noon, Vincent found her. She didn't hear him enter. One moment the room was empty, and the next, his presence filled the space, heavy and magnetic. He stood near the fireplace, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his trousers. He looked tired. There were shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, much like hers. "You are hiding," he said. It wasn't an accusation, just a flat statement of fact. Emily closed the book with a soft thud. "I'm reading, 'You have been on the same page for an hour.'" He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. He maintained a respectful distance, a physical barrier that felt like an apology for the night before. "I want to ask you something," Vincent said, his voice low and gravelly. "And I want the truth." Emily stiffened, gripping the arms of the chair. "Okay." "Do you want to leave?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Emily looked up at him. His face was a mask of carefully constructed indifference, but his eyes gave him away. They were tight at the corners, bracing for a blow. He was giving her an out. He was opening the cage door, despite everything he had said about safety and danger. Emily opened her mouth to say yes. It was the logical answer. It was the same answer. Go back to the diner, go back to the leaky faucet and the lonely nights and the safety of being nobody. "Maybe," she whispered. It was the truth. She wanted to leave the danger, but she didn't want to leave him. Vincent flinched. It was subtle, a tightening of his jaw, a slight drop in his shoulders, but she saw it. The disappointment was profound, a crack in the armor of the invincible boss. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. His voice was devoid of the heat that had been there last night. "I will not keep you against your will. Emily, if you decide to go, tell Marco. He will drive you." He turned and walked out of the library without looking back. He didn't beg. He didn't argue. He simply accepted his loss, as if he were a man accustomed to losing the things he wanted most. Emily sat there for a long time, her chest aching with a strange, hollow grief. He wasn't stopping her. She was free. So why did she feel like crying? Later that afternoon, the house felt oppressive. Emily needed air. She wandered toward the solarium, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants that smelled of damp earth and jasmine. As she approached the open door, voices drifted out, hushed, urgent, and laced with tension. She stopped, pressing herself against the wall behind a large potted fern. "The scouts were spotted at the South Ridge again," a rough voice said. Emily recognized it as Marco, Vincent's driver. "Are they Romano's men?" another voice asked. "Definitely. They are watching the house. They know he has someone in here. The word on the street is that Vincent Moretti has gone soft, that he's a civilian." Emily's blood ran cold. "If Romano makes a move," Marco continued, his tone grim, "they won't just come for the boss. They'll come for her to get to him. She is a liability. Luca, as long as she is here, the target on this house is twice as big. Does the boss know?" "He knows. He doesn't care. He's not thinking straight." Emily backed away slowly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She turned and walked quickly back toward the main hall, her footsteps silent on the carpet. She wasn't just a guest. She was a weakness. She was the crack in Vincent's armor that his enemies were waiting to exploit. If she stayed, she wasn't just putting herself in danger, she was getting him killed. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Vincent wouldn't send her away because he was too proud, or too lonely, or too stubborn. She had to make the choice for him. The decision settled in her gut like a heavy stone. She waited for nightfall. The moon was obscured by heavy clouds, leaving the estate draped in shadows. It was a perfect cover. Emily dressed in the darkest clothes she had, a pair of black leggings and a dark sweater provided by the housekeeper. She slipped out of the side door near the kitchen, the one the staff used for deliveries. The cold night air hit her face, sharp and biting. The garden was a labyrinth of shadows. She knew from her walks that the west wall had a section where the ivy was thick and the stonework was old. If she could climb it, She could reach the main road and flag down a car. She moved quickly, keeping low behind the hedges. Her breath misted in the air. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot in the silence. She reached the wall. It was higher than it looked from a distance, looming over her. She dug her fingers into the vines, searching for a foothold. "Going somewhere?" The voice came from the darkness, sudden and sharp. A beam of light hit her face, blinding her. Emily gasped, losing her grip on the vines and stumbling back onto the wet grass. A guard stepped out from the shadows of the oak tree. He was dressed in tactical gear, a rifle slung across his chest. He didn't point the weapon at her, but his stance was imposing. "Miss Emily," the guard said, his voice flat, "you're not supposed to be out here." "Please," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I just want to go home. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone anything. I can't do that. Miss—" He reached for his radio. "I have to call this in." "No!" Panic surged through her. She scrambled backward. "Don't call him, please. Just look the other way. What is going on here?" The authority in the new voice cut through the night like a blade. Vincent emerged from the darkness of the terrace. He was wearing a long black coat over his suit, his hair tousled by the wind. He looked furious. The guard snapped to attention. "Boss, I found her trying to climb the wall." Vincent looked at Emily, who was huddled on the grass, shielding her eyes from the flashlight. His expression darkened. He turned on the guard with a ferocity that made the man flinch. "Get that light out of her face," Vincent snarled. The guard immediately lowered the flashlight. "I was just securing the perimeter, sir." "You scared her," Vincent said, his voice dangerously low. "She is not a prisoner, and you are not a warden. Step back. Go to the north gate, now." "Yes, boss." The guard hurried away, disappearing into the dark. Vincent stood there for a moment, breathing hard. Then he crossed the distance between them and offered her a hand. Emily looked at it, the scars, the strength, and hesitated. Then she took it. He pulled her up effortlessly, but he didn't let go. "You said you might leave," Vincent said. His voice was rough, raw. "You didn't say you would run into the night like a fugitive." "I heard them," Emily cried out, pulling her hand away. "I heard your men. The Romanos are watching. I'm a target, Vincent, and so are you, because of me. I'm making you weak." Vincent went still. "Is that why you ran? To protect me?" "I ran because I don't belong here," she shouted, the fear and frustration finally boiling over. "I am a waitress. Vincent, I serve coffee. I worry about rent. I don't worry about rival gangs burning down mansions. You kidnapped me off a train and locked me in a gilded cage, and now you won't even tell me why." "I told you why," he said. "No, you gave me riddles." She stepped closer, poking him in the chest. "Why me? There are a million women in this city. Why did you bring me here? Why couldn't you just let me sleep?" "Because I haven't slept in 20 years, Vincent roared back. The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent ran a hand over his face, his composure shattering. He looked at her, stripped of all his defenses. "That night on the train," he said, his voice dropping to a tortured whisper. "You leaned on me. You were so heavy with exhaustion, and you just let go. You trusted me with your safety without even knowing my name, and for the hour that you slept on my shoulder, the noise in my head stopped, the paranoia, the planning, the violence. It just stopped." He took a step toward her. "I didn't want you to leave because you are the only peace I have felt since I was a child." Emily stared at him, her heart breaking for the boy he must have been and the man he had become. She was trembling, but not from the cold anymore. "Then why keep me here like a pet?" she asked, her voice shaking with tears. "Why not just talk to me? Why the guards? Why the secrets?" Vincent looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face with a desperate intensity. "Because," he whispered, "I don't know how to ask you to stay." The confession hung between them, fragile and honest. Emily looked at him. She saw the scars on his neck, the blood on his hands that he couldn't wash off, and the terrified hope in his eyes. She stopped thinking about the Romanos. She stopped thinking about the diner. She closed the distance between them. She grabbed the lapels of his coat and pulled him down. Vincent met her halfway. This kiss was nothing like the one in the kitchen. That had been a question. This was an answer. It was fierce, desperate, and consuming. Vincent groaned against her mouth, his arms wrapping around her waist, crushing her against him as if he were trying to merge their very souls. He lifted her off the ground, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her hands in his hair. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The world outside, the guards, the guns, the cold ceased to exist. He carried her up the stairs, neither of them breaking the kiss. It was a frantic tangle of limbs and lips, a starving desperation that had been building since the moment she opened her eyes on that train. In his bedroom, the only light came from the fireplace. He set her down on the edge of the massive bed. He paused, his hands framing her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. He looked at her as if he were waiting for her to come to her senses and push him away. "Emily," he rasped, "are you sure? I'm not leaving," she whispered. He kissed her again, slow and deep, a worshipful thing. They undressed each other with trembling hands. When his skin met hers, it was electric. His body was a map of violence, scars from knives, from bullets, from a life lived at war. Emily traced them with her fingertips, kissing the jagged line on his shoulder, the burn mark on his side. Vincent shuddered at her touch. He treated her as if she were the most fragile, precious thing on earth. He moved over her, his weight heavy and grounding. "You are so small," he murmured against her neck, his voice thick with emotion. "So soft. I'm not that soft," she breathed, pulling him closer. They made love with a fierce tenderness that blurred the lines between pain and pleasure. It was a release of years of loneliness for him, and a lifetime of being overlooked for her. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss was a confession. Vincent worshipped her body, his hands roaming with reverence, his eyes locked on hers as if checking to make sure she was still there, still real. When the end came, it was shattering. Emily cried out his name, and Vincent buried his face in her neck, holding her so tight she thought her ribs might crack, anchoring himself to her as the only solid thing in his universe. Hours later, the fire had burned down to embers. The room was warm and shadowed. They lay tangled together under the heavy duvet. Emily rested her head on Vincent's chest, listening to the slow, steady thud of his heart. His arm was draped over her, his hand idly tracing the line of her spine, vertebra by vertebra. He seemed different now. The tension that usually held his body rigid was gone. He seemed younger, lighter. "I feel," he started, his voice rumbling in his chest, vibrating against her cheek. He paused, searching for the words. "I feel like a man again. Not a monster, not a boss, just a man." Emily lifted her head, resting her chin on his chest so she could look at him. His hair was messy, his lips swollen. He looked devastatingly human. "Vincent," she said softly, "you have to tell me the truth now. No more riddles. What do you really do? Who are the Romanos?" Vincent's hand stopped moving on her back. He closed his eyes for a moment, and she feared he would shut her out again. But then he sighed, a long exhalation of surrender. "My family, the Morettis, we run the city's shipping and logistics," he began, his eyes opening to meet hers. "On paper. Underneath that, we control the territory. Gambling, protection, loans. The Romanos are our rivals. They want the territory I inherited from my father." He paused, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "I deal in violence, Emily. I enforce order in a chaotic world. I have killed men who tried to hurt what is mine. I have ordered things done that would give you nightmares." He watched her face, waiting for the disgust, the fear. "I am not a good man," he said, his voice stark and unvarnished. "I never will be. My hands are too dirty." Emily looked at those hands. She took one of them in hers, interlacing their fingers. She thought of the way he had carried her off the train, the way he had scolded the guard for scaring her, the way he had touched her just now, as if she were the only light in the dark. "You're not a good man," she agreed softly. Vincent flinched, looking away. But she continued, squeezing his hand until he looked back at her. "You saved me. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You listened to me." She leaned up and kissed him gently, a seal on a pact she was only just beginning to understand. "You're not a good man, Vincent," she whispered against his lips. "But I think you're my man. If you want me." Vincent made a sound low in his throat, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. He pulled her down, tucking her head under his chin, wrapping his arms around her as if to shield her from the entire world. "I want you," he vowed into the darkness, "more than I want my next breath." For a moment in the quiet of the room, it felt like enough. But outside the heavy curtains, the wind was picking up, and somewhere in the distance, beyond the high walls of the estate, the wolves were beginning to circle. The internet connection in the library was fast, a stark contrast to the agonizingly slow realization dawning in Emily's chest. She sat curled in the leather armchair, the laptop screen glowing white in the dim room. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad, trembling slightly. She had searched for his name. Vincent Moretti. The results were a digital cascade of terror. The Shadow of the East Side. Unsolved disappearances linked to Moretti shipping. Police commissioner declines comment on Moretti investigation. There were no pictures of him smiling. The few grainy photos that existed showed a man in a dark coat leaving a courthouse, or a blurred figure stepping into a car at a funeral. The articles described a man who was cold, ruthless, and untouchable. They called him a kingpin. They called him a monster. Emily looked up from the screen, staring at the heavy oak door. The man who had held her last night, who had traced her spine with the reverence of a pilgrim touching a shrine, was the same man the city whispered about in fear. She felt a tear between two realities. There was Vincent, who had carried her off a train because she looked tired, a man of impulsive, desperate kindness. And there was Vincent the world knew, a man who enforced his will with violence. She closed the laptop, the snap echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Who are you really?" she whispered to the empty air. It was past midnight when the gravel crunch of tires on the driveway broke the silence. Emily had been waiting in the foyer, unable to sleep. She stood up as the heavy front doors swung open. She expected Vincent to stride in with his usual controlled grace. Instead, he stumbled. Marco was under his arm, taking most of his weight. Vincent's suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was torn at the shoulder and stained with a dark, spreading crimson that looked black in the low light. His face was pale, slick with sweat, and there was a nasty gash above his eyebrow that was bleeding freely into his eye. "Vincent!" The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. She ran across the marble floor. Vincent's head snapped up, even dazed. His instinct was to shield her. He tried to straighten, pushing Marco away, but his legs buckled. "Don't," he gritted out, his voice wet and rough. "Don't look. Get him to the couch," Emily ordered Marco. Her fear instantly transmuted into adrenaline. "Do we need a hospital? Is he shot?" "Knives!" Marco grunted, hauling Vincent toward the living room. "They jumped us leaving the warehouse. It was a message. No guns, just blades. They wanted him to bleed." They lowered him onto the white sofa. Vincent hissed in pain, his hand clutching his side. "Get the medical kit," Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The big one from the upstairs bathroom. Go—" Marco hesitated, looking at his boss. "Do as she says." Vincent wheezed, his eyes squeezed shut. As soon as Marco left, Emily was on her knees beside him. She reached for his hands, hands that were covered in dried blood that wasn't his. "Vincent," she whispered. He opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but focused on her with terrified intensity. "I told you," he rasped. "I told you I was a monster. Now you see the blood. I see you," she said fiercely. "Just you." She began to unbutton his ruined shirt. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to work. The fabric peeled away to reveal a deep slash across his ribs and a multitude of dark bruises blooming across his torso. The Romano men had been thorough. They hadn't wanted to kill him. Not yet. They wanted to weaken him. Marco returned with the kit. For the next hour, the room smelled of antiseptic, copper, and fear. Emily cleaned the wounds. She wasn't a nurse, but she had steady hands. She washed the blood from his skin with warm water and a soft cloth. Every time she dabbed at the cut on his forehead, Vincent flinched. Not from the sting of the alcohol, but from the sight of the tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Stop!" he whispered, catching her wrist. "Don't cry for me. Emily, I earned this." "Nobody earns this," she said, her voice cracking. "They gave me a message," Vincent said, his gaze dark. They said I need to watch the girl." Emily froze. The cloth in her hand hovered over his chest. "They know," she breathed. "They know you are my heart," Vincent said, the admission sounding like a curse. "And they know that is the only way to kill me." Once the wounds were dressed and Marco had retreated to the security station, a heavy silence settled over the room. Vincent was sitting up, leaning back against the cushions, his chest wrapped in white bandages. "You have to leave," he said. He didn't look at her. He stared at the unlit fireplace. "Tonight. Marco will take the back roads. I have a safe house in the north. You will be invisible there." Emily stood by the coffee table, wiping her hands on a towel. "No." Vincent looked at her then. "This isn't a negotiation. You saw what they did to me. Next time, they won't aim for me. They will aim for you. I'm not going to a safe house to wait for a phone call telling me you're dead," Emily said. She walked around the table and stood between his knees. "Emily, please." His voice broke. It was the first time she had heard him beg. "I cannot fight them if I am terrified for you. You are making me weak." "No," she said softly. "I'm making you fight harder." She sat down, not on the chair beside him, but on his lap. She straddled him carefully, mindful of his ribs, her knees sinking into the cushions on either side of his hips. Vincent hissed in a breath, his hands coming up to hover over her waist, unsure whether to push her away or pull her closer. "You are playing with fire," he warned, his eyes searching hers. "I'm not afraid of the fire," Emily whispered, leaning in. "And I'm not afraid of your world. Vincent, not if you're in it." She leaned forward and pressed a kiss to the dark bruise forming on his jaw. It was a feather-light touch, a benediction. Vincent groaned, his head falling back against the sofa. "Emily, you want me to leave because you think you're too damaged," she murmured against his skin. She moved lower, kissing the pulse point at the base of his throat, right next to the bandage. "You think you can only show me the gentleman, the man in the suit." She pulled back to look him in the eye. "But I don't just want the gentleman," she said, her voice trembling with the force of her own conviction. "I want to be a fighter. I want the scars. I want all of it. I want the man who walked through blood to come home to me." Vincent looked at her with a mixture of awe and devastation. "You don't know what you are asking for." "I do," she said. "I did the research. I saw the articles. I know who you are, and I'm still here." Something inside him seemed to snap, or perhaps to heal. With a low growl, his hand settled firmly on her waist, pulling her flush against him. He kissed her, and it tasted of iron and desperation. It wasn't the gentle, reverent lovemaking of the night before. This was raw. It was an affirmation of life in the face of death. Emily kissed him back with everything she had, pouring her strength into him. She ran her hands over his shoulders, careful of the cuts but needing to feel the solidity of him. She wanted to be the anchor that held him to the earth. "I am yours," he whispered against her mouth, a vow spoken in the dark. "God help you, Emily, but I am yours." The next few days were a strange, suspended reality. The mansion went into lockdown. The number of guards doubled. Men with grim faces and automatic weapons patrolled the perimeter day and night. Emily, surprisingly, found herself being woven into the fabric of the household. She didn't hide in her room anymore. She brought coffee to the men on watch. She sat in the kitchen with Marco, listening to stories about his kids. But it was Maria, the elderly housekeeper, who truly let her in. Maria was a small woman with hands like gnarled roots and eyes that had seen 3 generations of Moretti men rise and fall. She was chopping vegetables for a stew, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the knife filling the kitchen. "You have his eyes," Maria said suddenly, not looking up. Emily paused, holding a basket of bread. "What?" "Vincent," Maria said. He looks at you the way a drowning man looks at the shore. I haven't seen him look at anyone like that since—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Since Isabella?" Emily asked softly. Maria's knife stopped. She looked at Emily, her expression stern but not unkind. "He told you about her?" "A little. He said he lost her." "He didn't just lose her," Maria said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He pushed her away to save her, and it broke him. He has been walking around this house like a ghost for 10 years. Cold, dead inside." Maria reached out and patted Emily's cheek. Her hand was rough and warm. "He is alive again," Maria said. "But you must be careful, child. In this world, happiness is a target. Don't become another ghost." The warning settled in Emily's stomach like cold lead. She nodded, gripping the bread basket tighter. I'm not going anywhere." "We shall see," Maria said, turning back to the onions. "Fate has a way of laughing at our plans." Fate, it turned out, didn't wait long to laugh. It happened 3 nights later. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, rendering the estate pitch black. Emily and Vincent were asleep in his room, her head resting on his uninjured shoulder. His arm draped possessively over her waist. The sound was not a knock. It was an explosion. The front gates were breached. The sound of metal tearing and the subsequent roar of engines shattered the peace of the night. Vincent was awake instantly. He didn't grope for consciousness. He snapped into it with terrifying clarity. He rolled out of bed, pulling Emily with him, shielding her body with his own before her feet even hit the floor. "Stay low," he commanded. His voice was ice cold. The voice of the dawn. Glass shattered downstairs, the distinct, terrifying sound of automatic gunfire raking across the front windows. "Vincent!" Emily gasped, clutching his arm. He didn't answer. He moved to the hidden panel in the wall behind the wardrobe. He punched in a code, and a section of the mahogany paneling slid open to reveal a small, steel-reinforced room. "Get in," he said, grabbing a handgun from the nightstand and checking the magazine with a practiced click-clack. "No!" Emily grabbed his wrist. "I'm not hiding while you—" "Emily!" He turned to her, grabbing her face in his hands. His eyes were wild, burning with a terrifying light. "This is not a discussion. This is my nightmare coming to life. If you are out here, I cannot think. I cannot breathe. You have to be safe so I can kill them." The brutal honesty of it silenced her. "Promise me," she sobbed, the sounds of shouting and gunfire getting closer, echoing up the grand staircase. "Promise me you'll come back. I will always come back to you," he swore. He shoved her gently into the darkness of the safe room. "Lock it from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me, or Marco." The panel slid shut, sealing her in. For Emily, the war was sound. It was the muffled thud of heavy boots running past the wall. It was the terrifying, staccato bark of gunfire that seemed to go on forever. It was the sound of glass breaking, of wood splintering, of men shouting in rage and pain. She sat in the corner of the small, cold room, her knees pulled to her chest, covering her ears. She wasn't praying for safety. She was praying for the monster. She was praying that Vincent was every bit as dangerous as the papers said he was. She needed the butcher of the East Side. She needed him to win. Time lost its meaning. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been 10 hours. Eventually, the shooting stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was heavy, pregnant with dread. Emily stared at the outline of the door in the dark, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. Was he dead? Was the silence the sound of the Romanos winning? Then, a keypad beeped. The panel slid open. Light flooded in, blinding her. A figure stood in the opening, silhouetted against the bedroom. He smelled of gunpowder, smoke, and sweat. "Vincent?" she whispered. He dropped the gun on the floor. He collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. He was covered in dust and debris. Blood spattered on his shirt. She couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. Emily scrambled out of the safe room and threw herself at him. "You're alive!" she sobbed, burying her face in his neck. "You're alive!" Vincent wrapped his arms around her, his grip bruising. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in deeply, shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind the horror of how close it had been. "They breached the perimeter," he gasped, His voice ragged. "We held them at the stairs. They're gone. We drove them back." He pulled back to look at her, his hands running over her face, her arms checking for injuries that couldn't possibly be there. "I almost lost you," he said, his voice breaking. "They were inside the house. Emily, they were in the house." He looked around the bedroom, the sanctuary that had been violated. The window was shattered. There were bullet holes in the plaster. "I cannot do this," he whispered, the realization crushing him. He slumped back against the wall, pulling her into his lap, rocking her. "I don't know how to love you without destroying you. Look at this. Look at my life. It is poison." Emily pulled back. She saw the despair in his eyes. He was getting ready to push her away again, this time for good. He was getting ready to sacrifice his own heart to save her life. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Her hands were stained with the soot on his skin. "You didn't destroy me," she said firmly. "You saved me." Again. "I brought this war to your doorstep," he argued, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "I am selfish. I am a curse." "No," she said. She kissed his forehead, then his eyes, then his mouth. "You are a man protecting his home, and I am part of that home now." She rested her forehead against his. "Everything is broken," Vincent whispered, looking at the ruined room. "Then we fix it," Emily said. Her voice was soft, but it held a core of steel that surprised even her. "We fix the windows. We wash the floor. You don't know how to love without destroying? Fine. Then we learn." She kissed his hands, the lethal, scarred hands that had just fought a war for her. "Let's build something instead," she whispered. "Let's build something they can't burn down." Vincent looked at her, stunned by her resilience. He had expected her to run. He had expected her to scream. Instead, she was sitting in the wreckage, planning the reconstruction. He pulled her close, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." But as he held her, looking over her shoulder at the shattered window and the dawn breaking gray and bloody over the horizon, Vincent knew the truth. The Romanos would be back, and next time, walls wouldn't be enough. If they were going to build something, they would have to burn the enemy to the ground first. The city was burning. Not the whole city, but the parts of it that belonged to Vincent Moretti. It started with a warehouse on the waterfront, a midnight arson that turned $3 million of imported silk and electronics into ash. Then, a trucking depot in Queens. By the third day, the attacks were personal. A car bomb detonated outside one of his legitimate restaurants an hour before opening. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The Romanos were no longer interested in territory. They were practicing a scorched earth policy. Vincent stood in the center of his study, the room thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and aggressive desperation. He was packing a bag, not with clothes, but with hard drives, ledgers, and cash. "I am not staying here," Emily said. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her knuckles white. "If you are going underground, I'm coming with you." Vincent didn't look up. He snapped the leather duffel bag shut. He looked exhausted. The bruising from the attack days ago had faded to a sickly yellow, but new lines of strain were etched deep around his mouth. "No," he said flatly. "Underground means moving every 6 hours. It means sleeping in basements and eating out of cans. It means living with a gun in your hand. You are not built for that." "Emily." "I can learn," she argued, stepping into the room. "You said we build something together. You said I was your partner." "I said you were my heart," Vincent corrected, finally looking at her. His eyes were hard, dull flint. "And I do not take my heart into a war zone. I have arranged a safe house for you, not one of mine, a neutral location. You will go there, you will stay inside, and you will wait until I call you. And if you don't call," the silence stretched between them, tight as a piano wire, "then you disappear," Vincent said softly. "There is a passport in the bag Marco has for you. New name, new history. You start over." "I don't want to start over," Emily shouted, the fear finally cracking her voice. "I want you." "Marco is waiting," Vincent said, turning his back on her to check the load of his pistol. "Go." The neutral location turned out to be a nondescript brownstone on the west side, but the chaos of the transfer, cars switching lanes, phones ringing, men shouting orders, gave Emily a window. She insisted she needed her medication from her old apartment. Marco, harried and distracted by reports of another fire in the garment district, reluctantly agreed to a 10-minute stop, parking the armored SUV right in front of her building. 10 minutes, Marco warned, checking his watch. "I'm right here. Don't answer the door for anyone." Emily ran up the 3 flights of stairs, her heart pounding. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and dust, the smell of her old life. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had walked these floors as a waitress. She unlocked her door and stepped inside. The apartment had not been ransacked. It was perfectly still. The air was stale. She moved to the bedroom to grab her things, but stopped dead in the center of the living room. On her small, chipped coffee table, sitting squarely in the center of a lace doily her mother had knitted, was a single red rose and a note. Emily approached it slowly, her blood running cold. The lock hadn't been broken. They had a key. Or they were good enough that locks didn't matter. She picked up the card. It was heavy, expensive cream stock. The handwriting was elegant, almost feminine. "We don't want the king. We want the crown jewels. Come to us, and the fires stop. Stay hidden, and we burn him to ash to find you." It was signed with a simple R. Emily stared at the paper. Vincent thought he could hide her. He thought he could stash her away in a safe house while he fought the world, but he was wrong. There was no safe house. As long as she was a leverage point, Vincent would be vulnerable. He would be distracted, worried, fighting with one hand tied behind his back, trying to protect her. She looked out the window. Marco was down there, scanning the street, ready to take her to safety, but safety was a lie. She didn't grab her medication. She grabbed her coat. She slipped out the fire escape window in the bedroom, climbing down the rusty iron ladder into the alleyway while Marco waited by the front door. The Velvet Room was a Moretti club, but it was technically neutral ground, a place where the high-ranking members of the families could meet without weapons. It was dark, smelling of expensive gin and leather. It was 2 p.m, so the club was closed to the public, but the heavy oak door was unlocked. Emily walked in. She was wearing her old jeans and a thick coat, looking entirely out of place against the Art Deco gold leaf and velvet booths. At the far end of the bar, a man sat alone. He was sipping an espresso. He was older, with silver hair combed back smoothly and a suit that cost more than Emily's entire apartment building. This was Silas, the Romano Consigliere, the advisor, the diplomat. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Miss Emily," Silas said, his voice dry and papery. He gestured to the empty stool beside him. "You are punctual. I admire that." Emily didn't sit. She stood 5 feet away, her hands balled into fists in her pockets to hide the shaking. "I didn't call for a meeting." "No," Silas agreed, "but we knew you would come. You have a martyr's eyes." "Stop the fires," Emily said. Her voice was thin in the cavernous room, but she forced it to be steady. "Stop attacking him. It is not that simple. My dear," Silas smiled, a cold, reptilian expression. "Vincent Moretti has taken too much territory. He has become arrogant, and now he has a weakness. I'm not a weakness," Emily said. "I'm a bargaining chip." "That's what you think, isn't it? I think you are the lever we can use to break his back," Silas corrected gently. "If you surrender to us, voluntarily, we will guarantee his safety. We will negotiate a truce. He keeps his life. We get the territory. And you. And I get what? You get to be the guest of the Romano family," Silas said, indefinitely. The front doors of the club exploded inward. Wood splintered and glass shattered as the heavy double doors were kicked open with terrifying force. Silas didn't flinch. He just took another sip of his espresso. Vincent stormed in. He was a hurricane of black wool and fury. He had a gun in his hand, a violation of the neutral ground rules, and he looked ready to murder every living soul in the room. Marco and 3 other guards were right behind him, weapons drawn. "Get away from her!" Vincent roared. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, feral and terrifying. He raised the gun, aiming it directly at Silas's head. "Vincent, no!" Emily screamed, throwing herself in front of the consigliere. "Move, Emily!" Vincent's eyes were wild. He was chest-heaving, sweat-drenched. A man pushed past the brink of sanity. "I will kill him where he sits. If you shoot him, the war never ends," Emily yelled back, spreading her arms wide to shield the old man. "Think, Vincent, this is what they want. They want you to break the truce rules so the other families turn on you." Vincent froze. The gun didn't waver, but his eyes locked onto hers. He looked betrayed. He looked terrified. "You came to them," Vincent whispered, the words dripping with venom. "You ran from Marco. You came to them. I came to stop you from bleeding out in a gutter." Silas stood up slowly, smoothing his jacket. "She has fire. Vincent, I see why you kept her. A pity she has more sense than you do." "Get out," Vincent snarled at Silas, not looking away from Emily. "Get out before I forget that I am a civilized man." Silas bowed his head slightly to Emily. "The offer stands, my dear. Think about it." He walked past the armed guards, calm as a frozen lake, and exited the club. As soon as the door closed, Vincent lowered the gun. He didn't holster it. He walked up to Emily, grabbed her arm with a grip that was bordering on pain, and dragged her toward the exit. "We are leaving," he gritted out. "Now." The drive back to the mansion, because the safe house was compromised and the mansion was the only fortress left, was done in a suffocating silence. When they reached the master bedroom, the explosion happened. Vincent slammed the door shut and spun on her. "Are you insane?" he shouted, his voice cracking with the force of his rage. "You walked into a room with the Romano wolf. He could have slit your throat. He could have taken you right then and there." "He wouldn't," Emily yelled back, throwing her coat onto the chair. "He wants a deal. He wants territory. I was negotiating." "You are not a soldier." Vincent grabbed her shoulders, shaking her once, hard. "You are not a consigliere. You are a waitress who fell asleep on a train. You have no idea what these men do to people." "I know what they did to you." Emily shoved him back. "I saw the blood. Vincent, I cleaned the cuts. I am not going to sit in a box and knit while you get butchered. I am trying to keep you alive. I don't want to be alive if you're dead." The words hung in the air, vibrating with truth. Vincent stared at her, his chest heaving. The anger in his eyes began to morph into something else, something darker, hotter, and infinitely more desperate. He looked at her like he wanted to consume her, to absorb her into his skin so she could never run away again. "You reckless, foolish woman!" He groaned. He reached for her, and this time, there was no gentleness. He grabbed the back of her neck and crashed his mouth down on hers. It was a kiss of possession. I was angry. I was terrified. Emily met it with equal force, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. They stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the bed. Vincent tore at his own shirt, buttons scattering across the floor. He needed skin. He needed proof. He needed to feel the pulse in her neck to assure himself that she hadn't been taken. "You don't leave me," he growled against her throat, lifting her up. "You never leave me. I'm here," she sobbed, wrapping her legs around him. "I'm right here." They fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs in desperation. The lovemaking was rough. Fueled by the adrenaline of the standoff and the terror of the near miss, there was no slow exploration today. It was a collision. Vincent moved with a frantic rhythm, driving into her as if he could nail her to the mattress, to the earth, to this life. Emily clawed at his back, crying his name, matching his intensity. She wanted him to know that she wasn't fragile glass. She was steel. She could take this. She could take him. When the climax came, it was like a breaking point, Vincent shouted, his body arching, burying his face in her shoulder, shuddering with a release that felt like a surrender. They lay there for a long time in the aftermath, the room quiet except for their ragged breathing. The sweat cools on their skin. Vincent rolled to his side, pulling the duvet over them. He tucked her head under his chin, his arm clamping over her waist like a vice. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into her hair. His voice was raw, stripped of all the command and power he usually wore, like armor. "When Marco called and said you were gone, I died. Emily. For 10 minutes. I was dead." Emily ran her hand over his chest, feeling the thud of his heart. I'm not here because I'm trapped. Vincent, she said softly, I'm not here because I'm scared of the world. I'm here because I chose you. Vincent kissed the top of her head. You chose a burning house. Then we burned together, she said. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true, because she loved him too much to let him burn. The phone on the nightstand rang 3 times again. It was a specific ringtone, the red line, only emergencies. Vincent sat up, the tenderness vanishing instantly, replaced by the cold efficiency of the dawn. He answered it on speaker. Speak. It's Silas, the voice purred from the speaker. I assume you have finished your reunion. Vincent's jaw tightened. What do you want? We are done playing with matches. Vincent, the families have voted. You have 24 hours. To what? To hand her over. If Emily is not at the West Docks by midnight tomorrow, we will not just burn your businesses, we will shell the mansion. We have acquired military-grade incendiaries. We will burn the estate to the ground with everyone inside it. You, the girl, the staff, everyone turns to ash. The line went dead. Vincent sat frozen, the phone still in his hand. Emily sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. Vincent? He stood up slowly. He didn't look at her. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark grounds, where his men were patrolling. He looked at the gate. He looked at the world that wanted to eat him alive. Marco, he said into his wrist radio. Here, boss. Prepare the jet. Flight plan for Zurich. 1 passenger, leaves in 2 hours. Copy that. Vincent turned around. His face was a stone mask. He was shutting down. He was locking the emotions away in a box so he could do what had to be done. Get dressed, he said to Emily. You are going to Switzerland. I'm not going, she said, standing up, letting the sheet fall. She didn't care about modesty anymore. I heard him. They will burn you down. They won't burn anything if I strike first. Vincent lied. But I need you gone to do it. You're lying, she said, walking toward him. You're going to send me away, and then you're going to die defending this empty house. I am sending you away so I can live, Vincent shouted, slamming his fist against the wall. Do you not understand? I cannot fight while you are here. Go to Zurich. I will come for you when it is done. He grabbed her face, kissing her hard, a goodbye kiss, though he wouldn't admit it. Pack a bag, he ordered. I have to brief the men. He stormed out of the room, leaving her alone. Emily stood in the silence. She looked at the bag he had told her to pack. She knew he wasn't coming to Zurich. The Romanos wouldn't stop until he was dead or she was theirs. If she left, they would kill him just to spite her. If she stayed, they would kill him to get to her. There was only one way to stop the fire. You had to smother it. She didn't pack a bag. She waited until she heard Vincent's heavy boots retreating down the hall toward the war room. She waited until the house was buzzing with the chaotic preparations for a siege. She dressed in her darkest clothes. She found a piece of paper and a pen. I love you, she wrote. That's why I can't let you die for me. She left the note on the pillow where his head had rested. She slipped out the same way she had come in, through the servants' passage, through the chaos of the kitchen where staff were boarding up windows, and out into the night. She didn't head for the jet. She didn't head for safety. She began walking toward the main road, toward the city, toward the West Docks. She was going to end the war. The silence in the bedroom was louder than the gunfire had been. Vincent woke with a start, his hand instinctively reaching across the sheets. His fingers met only cold, smooth silk. The warmth he had fallen asleep holding, the steady rhythm of Emily's breathing, the softness of her skin, was gone. Emily? His voice was rough with sleep, but the panic was instantaneous. He sat up, scanning the room. The bathroom door was open, dark. The closet was closed. Her coat, which had been thrown over the chair during their desperate argument earlier, was missing. He turned on the bedside lamp, and the light hit the pillow where her head should have been. There was a piece of paper. Vincent picked it up, his hands shaking in a way they never did when he held a gun. He read the 2 lines of text, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I love you. That's why I can't let you die for me. A roar tore from his throat, a sound of pure, animalistic terror. He scrambled out of bed, not bothering with a shirt, running barefoot into the hallway. "Marco!" he screamed, the name echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Marco!" His head of security met him at the top of the stairs, looking pale. He was holding a tablet. "Boss, the perimeter alarm didn't trip, but the service gate." "She's gone," Vincent snarled, grabbing Marco by the tactical vest. "She went to them." "Track her phone. Now." "We picked up a signal 10 minutes ago," Marco said, speaking rapidly. "She turned it on briefly near the highway. She's heading west, toward the industrial district." "The West Docks," Vincent breathed, "the Romano stronghold." He released Marco and turned back toward his room to arm himself. He didn't feel fear anymore. Fear had burned away, replaced by a cold, lethal clarity. They had called his bluff. They had taken the one thing that made him human. "Wake everyone," Vincent commanded, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Bring the heavy armor. We are not negotiating. We are burning it to the ground." The Romano warehouse was a cavernous skeleton of steel and concrete, smelling of diesel, salt water, and rot. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, drowning out the sound of the city outside. Emily stood in the center of the open floor. She felt small. The cold seeped through the soles of her boots, chilling her bones. In front of her, sitting on a crate like a king on a throne, was Silas. He was flanked by a dozen men, all armed, all looking at her with predatory amusement. "You have courage, Miss Emily," Silas said, his voice smooth and mocking. "I honestly did not think you would come." "I'm here," Emily said. Her voice didn't tremble. She was terrified, but she was done being a victim. "Now call off your men. Call off the hits on Vincent. That was the deal." Silas chuckled. Standing up, he walked toward her, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. "The deal was that you surrender, and you have—" "Call him," Emily demanded. "Tell him it's over." "Oh, it is over," Silas smiled. "But we aren't going to call him. We're going to let him simmer. We are going to let him wonder where you are. And then, when we have consolidated his territory, we will send him pieces of the problem." Emily's blood ran cold. "You lied. We are criminals, my dear," Silas whispered, leaning in close. "Lying is the language we speak," he gestured to his men. "Bind her. Put her in the container out back. We'll deal with her after the territory is secured." 2 men stepped forward, grabbing Emily's arms. She struggled, kicking out, but they were too strong. They dragged her backward. "He's going to kill you," Emily screamed, fighting against the grip. "He's going to kill all of you." "Let him try," Silas dismissed, turning his back. Then the world exploded. The massive steel rolling doors at the front of the warehouse didn't just open. They were ripped from their tracks. An armored SUV, engine roaring like a dragon, smashed through the metal, sending debris flying like shrapnel. The Romano men spun around, weapons raised, but they were too slow. Vincent Moretti stepped out of the vehicle before it even came to a complete halt. He was wearing a tactical vest over his white dress shirt, an assault rifle in his hands. He didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He opened fire. The warehouse erupted into chaos. "Take cover," Silas screamed, diving behind a stack of pallets. Emily was thrown to the ground by her captors as they scrambled for their own weapons. She hit the concrete hard, the breath knocked out of her. Bullets sparked against the floor, whining through the air like angry hornets. She scrambled on her hands and knees, looking for shelter. "Emily!" Vincent's voice cut through the noise, a desperate roar. "I'm here!" she screamed back. Though she knew he couldn't hear her over the gunfire, she saw him moving through the chaos. He was a force of nature. He moved with terrifying precision, taking down 2 men with clinical efficiency. He wasn't fighting for territory. He was fighting to get to her. Emily crawled toward a stack of shipping crates. As she moved, she saw movement in the shadows to her left. A small figure was huddled behind a forklift. It was a child, a young girl, maybe 10 years old, likely the daughter of the night custodian. She was frozen, eyes wide with terror, clutching a rag doll. A Romano gunman, pinned down by Vincent's suppressing fire, was blindly firing his Uzi toward the forklift, trying to create a distraction. The bullets chewed up the concrete inches from the girl's feet. Emily didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk. She launched herself forward. "Get down!" she screamed. She tackled the girl, throwing her body over the child's small frame just as the gunman swung his weapon around. Bullets slammed into the crates above them, showering them with wood splinters. Emily curled tighter around the girl, shielding her head, whispering frantic reassurances. Across the warehouse, Vincent saw it. He saw Emily dive. He saw the gunman aiming at her. Something inside Vincent broke, the last tether of his humanity, the part of him that calculated and planned, snapped. He dropped the rifle. It was empty anyway. He drew the long, serrated combat knife from his vest and the handgun from his hip. With a scream of pure, unadulterated rage, he charged. He ignored the cover. He ignored the bullets flying past him. He closed the distance to the gunman in seconds. The man tried to aim, but Vincent was already there. The violence that followed was swift and absolute. Vincent didn't stop. He moved through the remaining men like a scythe through wheat. He was a demon let loose, a monster protecting its heart. Silas broke from his cover, aiming a pistol at Vincent's back. "Vincent!" Emily screamed. Looking up from shielding the girl, Vincent spun, dropping to one knee. He fired a single shot. Silas dropped his gun, stumbling back, a look of shock on his face. He collapsed against the forklift, sliding down to the ground. Silence fell over the warehouse as abruptly as it had broken. Vincent stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving, his shirt soaked in sweat and blood. He looked wild, terrifying. "Emily!" he choked out. Emily slowly uncurled herself. She checked the girl. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The child shook her head, mute with shock, but unharmed. She scampered away toward the back exit where the sound of sirens was beginning to wail in the distance. Emily stood up. She was covered in dust. Her cheek was bruised. Her knees were scraped and bleeding. Vincent rushed to her. He dropped his weapons, the tools of his trade clattering uselessly to the floor, and grabbed her face. His hands were shaking violently. "You're alive!" he gasped, running his thumbs over her cheeks, checking her eyes, her neck. When I saw you fall, I'm okay," she whispered, her hands gripping his tactical vest to hold herself up. "I'm okay." He pulled her into him, burying his face in her neck. He let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He held her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack, but she didn't complain. She held him back just as hard. "You came," she said into his ear. "I told you," he rasped, pulling back to kiss her forehead, her nose, her lips, frantic, desperate kisses mixed with the taste of salt and smoke. "I will always come for you." The morning sun was soft, filtering through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom. The violence of the night before felt like a fever dream, distant and unreal, except for the very real aches in Emily's body. She woke up slowly. She was in the massive bed at the mansion. Her scraped knees were bandaged. There was a small butterfly strip on her cheek. Vincent was sitting in a chair beside the bed. He had showered and changed into soft lounge pants and a t-shirt, but he looked like he hadn't slept. He was watching her, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "Hi," she whispered, her throat dry. "Hi," he replied softly. He reached out and poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the nightstand, helping her sit up to drink it. "The girl?" Emily asked, handing the glass back. "She is safe," Vincent assured her. "Marco found her mother. They were given enough money to leave the city and start over somewhere quiet." He set the glass down and looked at her. His dark eyes were filled with a profound, aching vulnerability. "You almost died," he said. "You threw yourself in front of a gun to save a stranger. She was a child. Vincent, you are a civilian," he countered gently. "You were supposed to run. You were supposed to be selfish. I learned from the best." She smiled weakly. "You ran into a warehouse full of gunmen to save me." Vincent slid off the chair, kneeling beside the bed. He took her hand, cradling it in his broad, scarred palms. "I thought I lost you," he confessed, his voice thick. "When I read your note, the world went black. Emily, I have lived in the dark for a long time, but that was an abyss. I had to try," she said. "I couldn't let you burn for me. You didn't understand." Vincent said, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You are the only thing that keeps the fire from consuming me. Without you, I am just ash." He reached into his pocket. Emily's breath hitched. She expected a ring. Instead, Vincent pulled out a heavy, ornate iron key. It was old, the metal worn smooth by time. "This is the master key," he said quietly. "It opens the gates, the doors, the safe, the accounts, everything." He pressed the cold metal into her palm and closed her fingers over it. "I don't have a ring," he said. His eyes locked on hers. "And a ring is too small for what I owe you. You saved my life, Emily. Not just last night. You saved me on that train." "You didn't find me on that train," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I found you." "Marry me," Vincent said. It wasn't a question, it was a plea. "Take this key. Take the house. Take the empire. It's already yours. You already own everything I have." Emily looked at the key, then at the man kneeling before her, the monster who had learned to love, the fighter who had finally found something worth surrendering to. She reached out and touched his face, tracing the scar on his jaw. "Yes," she said. "Yes." Vincent let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 20 years. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she replied. "Now come to bed. You look tired." He climbed in beside her, careful of her bruises, pulling the duvet up over them both. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel like a fortress or a cage. It felt like a home. 3 months later, the rhythmic clack-clack, clack-clack of the wheels on the track was hypnotic. Outside the window, the Swiss Alps rolled by in a panorama of white snow and jagged peaks, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The private train car was warm, smelling of expensive leather and fresh espresso. Emily sat by the window, watching the world go by. She looked different. The shadows under her eyes were gone. She wore a cashmere sweater and a diamond on her finger that caught the light with every movement. But some things hadn't changed. She felt a heaviness in her eyelids. The gentle rocking of the train was pulling her under. Beside her, Vincent was reading a book. He looked up as she shifted. He smiled, a true, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Tired?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. She slid closer to him on the velvet bench seat. Without asking, she leaned her head on his shoulder. Vincent shifted instantly, adjusting his arm to cradle her, his cheek resting against the top of her head. He closed his book and set it aside. Well, he didn't need to read. He had everything he needed right here. "Sleep," he murmured, his hand smoothing her hair. "I've got you." Emily closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, sandalwood and rain. She remembered the last time she had done this, in a cold, gritty subway car, surrounded by strangers. She remembered the fear, the exhaustion, the loneliness. Now, she was wide awake. Even as her eyes closed, she knew exactly where she was going. She wasn't heading to an empty apartment, and she was heading into a future she had fought for. She intertwined her fingers with his, squeezing his hand. "I'm never sleeping without you again," she whispered. Vincent squeezed back, his hold on her unbreakable. "And I," he promised into the quiet of the car, "will never let you go." The train carried them forward, cutting through the mountains, heading toward a horizon that was finally perfectly clear. Thank you so much for listening to She Falls Asleep on a Mafia Boss's Shoulder on a Train, but wakes up in a mansion instead of her home. I hope you enjoyed Emily and Vincent's journey from the subway to the altar. If this story touched your heart, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear which part was your favorite. Also, tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you want more passionate, emotional, and thrilling stories like this one, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for your support, and until next time, keep believing in love, even in the darkest places.